Okay, welcome back. In this little section, we're going to be talking about Chapter 6 in the Voting and Elections textbook. It starts out by talking about age and how age influences voting profiles. So, the first thing you should know is that voting is least likely from the young, right? The closer you are to your first election, the less likely you are to vote. Voting tends to rise monotonically over time, and then it tops out in your 60s, something like that. There's a theoretical belief that voting drops off after your 60s, actually, but there's not a lot of evidence for this. This is because it's really hard to find data on very old voters. A lot of time, the survey implementers don't have access to old folks' homes or other institutions like those. And so we don't have any real data from very elderly Americans or Europeans. And so it's really hard to come up with, a theoretical or statistical finding. Why don't the young vote? The first reason for this is they just don't really know about politics, right? It's their very earliest years. They don't have a lot of political experience or political knowledge, so they're less likely to turn out to vote. The second sort of suggested reason for this is that the young don't really have families or any real economic concerns. Generally, they're living with their families still. They're not having to raise a family of their own. They generally don't have kids at this age. And so as they start to sort of develop these later in life attributes like having children and getting married and having a sort of solid job, they become more likely to participate in elections. The third suggested reason why young voters don't vote very often is because they're around sort of other young non-voters, and they sort of buttress each other's non-voting. And once you sort of start to get into the work life and you develop connections at your church or in your work, you become more likely to sort of experience life with other voters, and other voters can pressure you to start voting. We also find that greater education tends to correlate with higher turnout. This has been in question in recent research years, and they're saying that education could correlate with other sort of life attributes like your class, your education, things of that sort. I mean, not your education, but your income. So there has been much more skepticism in recent years that education is actually contributing to additional voting. We also find that class has very little effect on turnout. It has a sort of minor effect in America, but we don't really find any effect in Europe or Latin America. Income has a pretty strong influence in American elections. The more money you make, the more likely you are to turn out. But we don't find this finding in Europe. So it's sort of watered down in the European context. When it comes to gender, we find that women vote at higher rates in the United States. And this by about 7 points. Women tend to vote about 7% more than men in the United States. They also tend to vote more Democratic than Republican. We don't really find this in comparative studies, though. It's not really the same in Europe and South America. Women also, through survey results that have come out in recent years, women tend to have a little bit less political knowledge than men. And that's sort of across the board in Europe and America, etc. Married citizens tend to vote more often than non-married citizens. And again, this may be tied to sort of the familial aspect of things, where you're more likely to vote if you have a family. We also tend to find that, at least during sort of the pre 1970s, pre 1965 Civil Rights Act, black voters were much less likely to vote. A lot of this has to do with sort of Jim Crow laws, right? They put in all of these ridiculous laws to keep black voters from the polls. But in recent years, black voters have actually caught up and surpassed white voters in America. Black voters tend to vote highly Democratic, right? We're talking 93 to 95% of all black voters tend to vote for the Democratic Party. And they also tend to vote more than white people, which is pretty incredible. So that's the last finding of the chapter. I'll see you for the next one. Have a great day.